Hello, as a follow-up to our constitutional carry series that I just did, and I realize it's a long video series, but I think it's well worth watching if you have any questions about it. I wanted to give a brief video about carrying a handgun in Texas, a handgun being a pistol or revolver. I'm not talking about long guns today, which rifle, shotgun, submachine gun. To figure out if you can carry a handgun in Texas, you basically need to figure out, first of all, what your authority for carrying is. 4615 of the Texas Penal Code is our non-applicability statute, and so right off the bat, peace officers and judges and prosecutors that have a license to carry are pretty much exempt from all gun-free zones. So their carry is basically unrestricted, and that's the end of the inquiry for them. The rest of you can look at 4615, and there are specific non-applicabilities that may apply to you in some situations or depending on your job, etc. So you'd want to look at those. The next level is 4602, which is what's now basically our constitutional carry statute. It used to be a very narrow statute allowing carry basically in your vehicle, your home or property, to and from those, and vehicle would also include watercraft. It's now a much broader statute. And the last subgroup are folks that are carrying under the authority of the license to carry statutes. And again, you can be carrying under one or more of these authorities, so you really want to think about that. Just having a license to carry does not automatically mean that you're carrying under that authority. You could be carrying under 4602 authority, you could be carrying under 4615 authority, so keep that in mind. The way these statutes are written, they talk about what authority you're carrying under. So just having a carry permit does not automatically exclude you from a certain place or include you in a certain place, so keep that in mind when you're figuring out which authority you're under. So right off the bat, 4602 basically provides that if you're over 21 and you're not a criminal, and there's certain criminal violations that are listed there, and then you're basically presumed at the outset to be legally carrying, subject to all the other laws that we've talked about. And remember, most of these statutes talk about intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly carrying. They don't talk about negligently carrying. So anytime that you're negligently carrying, which is basically an accident, you usually have an ability to leave and not be charged with a crime. And I would urge you, if you do negligently carry illegally, to take advantage of that and leave the location immediately and don't cause any trouble, and you should be okay. So remember, 4602 allows for both open or concealed carry, and it's vague enough that it says open carry has to be in a holster. It doesn't say if the holster has to be worn or worn properly. I would urge you to wear the holster properly and not try to push the issue. But if that's in your personality and you want to be a test case, we always need test cases for the courts to rule on some of the ambiguities in the statute. For me personally, I'm not willing to be the test case, but if that's your nature, then by all means do it. 4603, as we covered in that video, is our gun-free zones that are basically permanent gun-free zones, the exception being peace officers, judges, prosecutors with their license to carry, or if you fall under any of the listed exceptions that we've talked about in other videos. But otherwise, 4603 locations are generally off limits, and you don't want to carry into them. If you accidentally carry into them, turn around and leave, and you're generally okay. And again, I'm not going to talk about all those locations. If you want to review the old video, watch my 4603 video, and I go in great detail about those locations and what's prohibited. So if you're going about your business, you're in a public place, and you're not in a 4603 location, then basically there are three things that you need to look for that would potentially prohibit you from carrying. And that's a 3005 sign, a 3006 sign, and or a 3007 sign. So like we talked about in my 3005 video, the 3005 sign applies only to people carrying under the authority of constitutional carry. If you have a license to carry, the 3005 sign does not apply to you, and you can ignore it legally. If you do not have a carry permit and you're carrying under the authority of constitutional carry, which for our purposes will be 4602, then you would have to comply with the 3005 sign and not carry into that location, with the exceptions being, of course, if you are going to and from your home, residence, leased place, so forth. Again, in the 3005 video, I went over all the exceptions. They're pretty much common sense exceptions. If you see a 3006 sign, that only applies if you are 1, carrying under the authority of the license to carry statute, and 2, are carrying concealed. So it does not apply to open carry, it does not apply to constitutional carry, it does not apply if you're carrying under the authority of 4615 or 4602. So keep that in mind. And this is where there's going to be an interesting question that's surely going to come up at some point. If a location has a 30.06 sign posted and you have a license to carry, can you carry under the authority of the constitutional carry past that sign? It's a valid question, and it will be an interesting one to see how it's dealt with. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled in the Chiarini case that folks carrying under the authority of 4602 have a different authority than carrying with a license to carry, for example. So that's where there's going to be some confusion. Just having a license to carry doesn't mean that you're carrying solely under that authority. And the 30.06 sign applies solely to carrying concealed under the authority of your license to carry. You may run across a location that has only a 30.07 sign posted, which is no open carry for a license to carry person. And again, it's only under the authority of the license to carry statute. So if you're carrying your weapon openly under some other authority, such as 4602 or 4615, the 30.07 sign doesn't apply to you. Of course, the caveat comes in if you are openly carrying a firearm, presumably people are seeing it. I know some people are kind of oblivious to it and don't notice it. Me in particular, I tend to look for folks that are carrying, and I try to spot if they have a concealed or openly carried firearm, and I'm pretty good at it. But anyway, so chances are if you openly carry past a 30.07 sign, you're probably going to have some negative interactions with folks and or law enforcement. And the question again comes down to if they solely have a 30.07 sign and you are constitutionally carrying openly, that sign legally should not apply to you. Now obviously the smart thing anytime you see any of these signs, if you have any run-ins with anybody, is just turn around and leave immediately. Don't create any problems for yourself. That way, you go on about your business. If you want to challenge it and say, look, I'm not carrying under the authority of my carry permit, I'm carrying under constitutional carry authority, and that 30.07 sign does not apply to me, and you want to be the test case, it would be an interesting case to argue to the courts and see how they rule on it. But again, that's not for me to test personally. I'm not in the mood of being the test case. So naturally, we are going to see locations that have 1, 2, or all 3 signs posted. My prediction is probably within the next couple months we're going to start seeing a bunch of places have all the signs, because people generally get paranoid whenever you talk about carrying handguns. And generally what I've noticed, if you call any place and say, do they allow handguns? No, do not carry here. That's not allowed, even if it's perfectly legal and fine. People just don't seem to understand why you want to carry. So my prediction is once the lawyers get involved and the salespeople get involved, there are going to be a bunch of these signs sold to places. There's probably insurance companies are going to tell them they have to put the sign up, whatever. So you're going to see these signs. But what's interesting is if you only see 1, of the signs, or possibly two of the signs, then, like I said before, it's kind of up to you to figure out if the sign applies to you or not, and to not be a jerk about it. But if you are lawfully carrying and somebody spots you and says that you're not lawfully carrying, what's the best way to handle it so that you don't get cited or arrested and end up being the test case? Obviously, like I said, it seems to be a safe bet to immediately turn around and leave the location and not go back. The statutes are all written that way to give you that out, so to speak. I don't know how beneficial it's going to be if you are stopped. For example, let's say you're open carrying in the H-E-B grocery store. I know up until recently at least, they've had the 30.07 signs glued to their glass. Again, I would say that's not a legally valid sign. We talked about that in the 30.07 video, but for our purposes here, let's pretend that that is a valid sign and that you've seen it and you open carry into the H-E-B and you're stopped. I just don't think that they're going to be all that amenable to discussing the difference between constitutionally carrying and licensed to carry. And I don't think you're going to get anywhere trying to explain to them that you're legally openly carrying in their store. And obviously, if somebody with apparent authority to tell you to leave tells you to leave, then your best bet's to leave. And this is where things are kind of weird when we have constitutional carry and license to carry folks. If they're giving you notice under one sign or the other sign and it doesn't apply to the other, am I being silly to say, oh, well, I'm not carrying under the authority of the one you're telling me not to carry under, I'm carrying under the other authority and therefore I'm legal. Like I said, I think the end result is just, it's best for you to leave and not question it, because I think ultimately it's going to be a losing battle for you. I don't think the courts would ultimately decide that you're in the right, even though letter of the law, I think there's a valid argument to be made there, certainly. The last one I just wanted to touch on briefly is disorderly conduct. A lot of people don't know about this statute, but 4201A8 says it's a crime if you display a firearm or other deadly weapon in a public place in a manner calculated to alarm. And I've touched on that before, that there weren't any court cases saying what's calculated to alarm, and so you basically had some folks saying that you could run around with an AR-15 in your hands and that shouldn't alarm people, and others said, well, if it's in a sling over your back, that wasn't calculated to alarm. Unfortunately, we got a Court of Criminal Appeals decision, and I'm going to read to you to the pertinent parts. An information tracking language of Penal Code Section 4201A8 provides sufficient notice to a defendant of the particular offense charged. The information is not required to detail how the state intends to prove that the defendant's display of a firearm in a public place was, quote, calculated to alarm. That's a 2019 case, so it's fairly recent, and unfortunately it doesn't give us any guidance as to what's calculated to alarm. My point is, an officer or a prosecutor, if they want to mess with you, could charge you under that and just say, well, you calculated to alarm people by carrying. I don't expect that it would go very far if you are complying with the other statutes as far as having an openly carry firearm in a holster or a concealed firearm. Obviously that shouldn't calculate to alarm. I think it's more used for your long gun carry, but it is one statute that they could start trying to use against people open carrying firearms, saying that certain places maybe alarm people. Again, I'm just speculating here, but since that statute is not defined and the courts didn't give us a definition, we kind of got to assume the worst. And again, like I've said in the other videos, I always take the approach with these of what advice is going to keep you out of trouble not arrested, not ticketed, etc. If you want to be the test case and you want to push the envelope and see how far things can go without getting in trouble, obviously that's a totally different mentality. Most people that would hire me as an attorney are not looking for that sort of advice. They're looking for the advice that lets them just go about their business without any interactions with law enforcement. So hopefully this was a helpful summary of our handgun carry laws and how they interact if you are constitutionally carrying with a license to carry, or basically a law enforcement officer or judicial officer or prosecutor that has their license to carry. You kind of elevate it up the same as a peace officer. Anyway, hopefully that kind of explains away any confusion there might have been, and also opens up some questions that will need to be answered over time by the courts as far as how this all works. For example, somebody constitutionally openly carrying past a 30.07 sign, does it matter if that person also possesses a license to carry or not? Things like that. So we won't really know the answers right off the bat. Like I said, best advice is if you see the signs, just avoid that place. Don't even give them your money. They're not worth it. The signs are stupid. They're not solving anything. They're not preventing crime. They're not making it safer. All they're doing is taking away the roughly 3% of the population that has a license to carry. That population of folks commits such a tiny percent of all crimes, and I've posted the links before, you can look it up yourself. It's just a minuscule amount of crime committed by folks that have a license to carry. So why we're even having gun-free zones for them is beyond me, but maybe folks' insurance company makes them do that or whatever. It's dumb, but it is what it is. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.